Hi, thank you for coming to my presentation. This is going to be called the Rocky Horror Pandemic Show. You may be familiar with the play Rocky Horror Picture Show. This one's a little bit different. It's a socially distanced immersive theater piece on a $15 budget. So let's get into it. Oh no. The heart of the piece. I got my presentation to work, so we're all good there. The heart of the piece is what we really wanted to convey through the storyline of the piece. Regardless of COVID, regardless of all the different challenges that we're facing with production, we wanted to make sure that we were putting it on for a reason. We wanted to make sure that it still conveyed what we wanted it to convey. So some of the main themes that I really focused on in directing this piece were sexual tension and what is taboo. And so much in Western culture, especially in cultures that were founded on Judeo-Christian values, sex and morality are on opposite sides of the spectrum. You can't have both. And this piece, and especially a lot of queer elements and pieces of American culture, challenge that idea that sex and morality don't have to be these disparate pieces, that you can be a sexual being and still be a kind person, be a moral person. You can be a very put together kind of, I won't use the word prudish because that's also a word that's used to vilify women and to make them seem like they're doing something wrong in their sexuality. But someone who's more sexually conservative, and you could be a terrible person or you could be a good person. It totally on a separate scale than your sexuality and your morality. So we really wanted to have that element of sexuality and what it means to us, what it means to our culture, what it means to other cultures, really present in this piece. And we also wanted to pay homage to the LGBTQ history of this show. It is a classic piece of queer history, Rocky Horror Picture Show is. And it was based in ballroom culture, which is not like, but more so these underground, I'm not going to say nightclubs, but they were gatherings of people, specifically in New York City. So you may have seen things like voguing, like Madonna's Vogue is based off of this style of dance. And you can see I've included some pictures. There are competitions like best dress, best body, best dance, and whole new dance styles and cultures came out of this era, with people who were marginalized from all different cultures coming together to really celebrate their queerness and their individuality and make a safe space and a shared family and a found family that they forged themselves. And that was something else we really wanted to bring to the piece, is the idea of a found family. Frankenfurter, who is the master of the house type person, has this cohort of weird oddities. And in the musical, they're called phantoms. So they're these strange people who add little bits to the songs and they just are in the mansion. They're a found family. He's kind of like a house mother. You may have heard this term, like a drag mother on Drag Race or something like that, who takes young queer people and teaches them the way of their art. And oftentimes, especially when more frequently people were being kicked out of their houses for being gay or being trans or liking drag or things like that, they would house them and actually help kind of keep them on the right track while also teaching them the culture. And that's something very important to us that we really wanted to include in this show. So the theme kind of worked for our small budget. You know of a drag queen and you think industrious, like, oh, they're making dresses out of trash bags and they look beautiful still. That is something we really wanted to make sure was embedded in the theme of this piece, and it worked out great because we had a $15 budget. So this kind of arts and craftsy handmade thing, imbuing an object with personal value makes it beautiful. In Tennessee Williams's A Streetcar Named Desire, Blanche Dubois buys this really cheap little red lantern thing that she puts over a bare light bulb, and it totally changes the room. It makes it all a different color from a lighting design standpoint. It takes the imagination to new places, casts a hue of red over everything, but it's just this cheap little paper lantern that she thought was valuable and she thought added beauty to the room, and so it did. And the audience buys into that and believes it because you see it through Blanche's eyes. That same idea is totally present in Rocky Horror. They're all playing dress up. In the lab, they're wearing these cloth face masks, which I thought was so interesting. We'll see a slide from the movie in a second where they're wearing them. which is, that was before anyone had ever thought of a cloth face mask. It doesn't work in terms of if you're conducting surgery. That's never going to be the perfect thing to use. It was dress up. It was the idea of being a medical person, being someone who's a scientist, and having all these things that you have on hand and making them into what your story needs to convey. So that's really a really great strength of having the small budget, is that it made us stay true to that idea. Also, we wanted to think about the role of gender in Rocky Horror. We've got sex, now we've got to talk about gender. And as you know, they're probably you know that they are different things. So Frankenfurter, head of the house, is already androgynous. He is a man, he identifies as a man, but he also sings a whole song about being a transsexual from Transylvania. So there's this difference of where does he fit in? He's very androgynous. He wears a corset. He wears more masculine clothes sometimes. So I wanted to say, let's take that idea and apply it to every single character. We're casting gender blind. We take the idea and the essence of the character and don't bother about whether or not the gender of the person who is playing them would match the person in the movie or the person in pop culture that we've seen. So we had an amazing turnout for this. Both of our Frankenfurters ended up being women, and that was also because it's a kind of skimpier clothing item. And there have been recently at our school, right before this show went up, there were a couple of hate crimes against LGBTQ individuals. You may have seen that it's pretty frequent occurrence as a queer student on campus to have a pickup truck drive by and yell the F slur at you. So like there are opportunities that this could be a potentially unsafe space. And we wanted to make sure that everyone felt very comfortable with the role they were cast in. So both of our Frankenfurters did end up being women, because then we wouldn't have a man out there in lingerie that was uncomfortable with doing that. So we also had a non-binary Eddie, who's the kind of the first try of Frankenstein's monster, if you will. Rock and roll kind of hard rock guy that ends up falling in love with one of the other characters. And I love the idea that this person is non-binary and they forged a gender of their own. And that's kind of how Eddie is. Eddie was created and made, didn't exist, and like nature, it was hard to do and it was difficult and it was a labor of love to find their identity. We also had Magenta, who's typically cast as a female, cast as a man, and it was hilarious. Totally took on that character, didn't make a kind of show of like, I'm a girl, but said, I'm wearing this dress, this is my costume, I have this feather duster, I will be flirty and fun, and that's the character, and it worked out fantastically. As I said, we had some challenges and safety precautions. Obviously, COVID-19 was an issue, and we'll get to that later, but the biggest thing that within gender that we found is we really needed to have a place for people to get ready before the show and get unready after the show. Some people lived with housing situations that weren't exactly 100% accepting of queer identities and queer people. So we offered them a space to put on their makeup before the show outside of their room and then also take it off after the show so they didn't have to go into their space and kind of open themselves up to more danger or potential prejudice than was necessary. And we found that this was a really beautiful thing to do. I walked through this piece questioning the importance of gender, questioning why we assign gender to things. And I think I heard that from a lot of people who went through it. We had about a 60-person showing to get to see this piece, which is incredible because we couldn't have audiences. And we'll get to how we did that later, but people walked away from this, I think, having fun because it's a Halloween show and it's supposed to be fun, but I think there were also some questions stirred, and that's always something I want to contribute to art. So the challenges we faced. Here's the picture, I promise. Look at those cloth face masks. It's dress up. He's wearing big pearls. The pandemic. Obviously, quarantines could happen at any minute. So I made sure that the contents of the play was a walkthrough. You walked through different stations and you interacted with 1 to 3 actors doing some sort of thing that you got to experience with them. But that means that for every station with the actors is the length of a song. So the songs from the movie, we weren't allowed to sing in person. At that point, it was considered a super spreader because you're projecting more of your projectiles through the air. So we wanted to make sure that people could go to each and every round and still experience the music and the culture of it. We just played the music from the movie. But with every song, there was a little experience and there was something to do and there was something to see with these characters. But we also knew that if someone got put into quarantine and we had to take out that section, it wouldn't ruin the whole piece. So we kind of had this puzzle piece thing, and luckily, no one went into quarantine over the course of our production and we got to see the full thing. But I wanted to make sure that everyone's hard work got to go somewhere, even if one person had to drop out. And we didn't have nearly enough people to have understudies. We also had small audiences, so we couldn't gather everyone together to come put on Rocky Horror and watch it. That's why it was a walkthrough. Groups of 2, masked with gloves on, would walk through this experience, and there'll be a map on a later slide so you can see just how expansive it was. It was through the back gardens and went through the black box, and it was a really fun experience. It was indoors and outdoors, and we wanted to make sure that we didn't have large rehearsals for this. If the play and the show itself was set up with such distancing involved and so many precautions, it's very easy to get everyone together in a room and we all know each other and just kind of bend the rules. Really wanted to make sure that didn't happen. Not only for the individual safety of everyone in the cast, but also the fact that that defeats the whole quarantine thing. So we gathered and we rehearsed just as pods. My stage manager, Haley Turner, who was sent from heaven, I just gave her my schedule and said, fill it in with little half-hour spots for every group gets 2 rehearsals of a half hour. And we did that and it worked out really well. There was some confusion from the cast in kind of this being an experimental piece of theater. We learned a lot from it. So some members of the cast felt confused. They didn't know what the story arc and the structure was until they got there on the day. If we had had time to all get together and watch the movie or all get together and do something, have a table read, that would have been fantastic. But I think this worked pretty well given the circumstances. And we want to include our online students. So we actually had Demetria Hale, who was taking a semester off and she'll be back next year. We wanted to include her. She's part of our company. So I made her a narrator role. And that was another element that added to every single station, had these little narration elements in between. You could scan a QR code for if you wanted to. It was optional, so if the flow of it was going, and that actually helped us a lot with timing. So if people were waiting for a station, they had something to do. The budget, we didn't want to exhaust our base. So I personally don't want to make having student productions something that you pay to play. And if you want to produce something, then you have to pay for it. You have to pay for the rights and you have to pay for the costumes. You have to pay for accompaniment, etc. I want really very much the fact that once you get to college, then everyone's on level playing ground as much as possible to be true. So I went to Alpha Psi Omega, which is our theater fraternity, which was running this project, and said, hey, what's our budget? And they said, oh, we don't usually typically do big budgets for student works. How about $15? And I said, can we fundraise as a group? Is that possible? And they said that we really don't want to exhaust our base right now. We were doing the original planning of this pretty early on in the semester, and a lot of people had just suffered very hard financial consequences from the pandemic, and they obviously still are. So we don't want to be taking everyone and saying, hey, can you please? I said, all right, let's do it with $15. And Emma Russell and Jackson Barnes definitely stepped up to the plate as props master and costumes designer to get us pulled costumes, things from home, really cheap things, handmade things that made a beautiful piece. The location, couldn't just close down all the campus for the Halloween night. It wasn't possible. We knew that there'd be people in a party mood. It was Halloween night. So we decided to make the heavy traffic areas the more party-centric areas. And that made the interruptions kind of part of the show. Like everyone could join the party. And if you're interested and you like what you're seeing, go back to the end, get in line and reserve a ticket with Haley, those types of things. We also wanted to make sure that there was performer safety. So I was walking around the entire time, making sure that everyone felt safe and secure. and that, like I said, there were concerns about the safety of our LGBTQ members or potentially young women out there in scantily clad clothing on Halloween nights. So we wanted to make sure, and thank goodness nothing happened. High Point students are generally good people, and most people are generally good people, but we still always want to be prepared for that one instance where something could happen. So I was walking around and Haley Turner was walking around making sure on headset that everyone felt secure and safe through the entire piece of the show. And everyone was wearing their masks and there were gloves for all of the guests. Everything was as safe as it could possibly be. So also, no budget means we can't just hire people to come and do things. So we are student run. You can see our whole list here. I think I've mentioned everyone except Stefan, who did all of our lighting and booth responsibilities. And also Dan McGee stepped up for that as well and just put together a fantastic show that was entirely student run. So the process, like I said, it's a walkthrough in groups of 2. We had a fragmented rehearsal process. It was outside. You can see the map here that's clearly made by me. So it's not that high tech. But you started out and walked through the garden, around, past that little bit in front of like the Womcom C-store, back around to the front of the Black Box Theater, through and through. And it was so fun. It was so fun. And I want to share with you today. So let's watch the final product. Here we go. It'll load, I swear. thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me. I think my email will be here, or you can reach out to me on Instagram for more like theatrical happenings. Right now, we're in production for Jay Putnam's immersive piece, Time. He's a professor here. And it'll be in the planetarium on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday of this week. So come see it. And thank you for tuning in. Have a great day.